When the disciples first started to follow Jesus, they thought they had hit the jackpot. Because here's a miracle worker, here's a famous teacher, and if they follow him, they're going to make out pretty well. That's why when Jesus predicts his passion, remember what Peter says? Don't say it, Lord. And in fact, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus predicts his passion 3 times. After the first time, Peter says, don't say it. Jesus has to say, get behind me, Satan. After the second time, they try to chase some little children away that Jesus is going to bless. After the third time, they're talking about who's most important among them. They don't get it. And Jesus has to clarify that being a Christian doesn't mean that we get all our wishes granted. Being a Christian means God gives us the opportunity to die to ourselves. When we're giving, when we're serving, that's when we are most in the image and likeness of God. This is a very Franciscan idea, that God is the one who serves. But you see it all throughout the Old Testament. Remember when God created Adam and Eve? And he gave them that garden. He planted the garden. So generous. You can almost see him in his overalls working in that garden. And he tells them, please, one thing, don't eat of the tree in the middle of the garden. It's kind of like talking to a teenager. The second you say don't do it, what do they think? Hey, that looks good. And they end up eating the tree. And he told them, if you eat it, I'll kill you. And then what does he end up doing? He makes them a wardrobe. We see it in the story of Abraham. Remember how Abraham was put in a trance, and he was supposed to divide animals and make a pathway, and then God passed through the animals in the form of a flaming fire pot. Now, in the old translation, they used to have a flaming brazier, but way too many lectors were reading flaming brazier. So they changed it to a flaming fire pot. What is the significance of that? When you make a covenant, you call a series of blessings and curses upon yourself. God is saying to Abraham, if I ever break my promise to you, may I be torn asunder like those animals. And he doesn't ask Abraham to pass through. And even God's revelation of his name, I am who am. What does it mean? One of the meaning is, I am who I am for you, who I will always be for you, who I always have been for you. That God defines himself in terms of service to us. And isn't that exactly what we see at the Last Supper? Jesus washing the feet of the disciples? By washing the feet, he is not denying his divinity. He's revealing it. To be God-like is to serve. And the greatest gift that God ever gave us is the ability to serve. And what's the reward for service? The ability to serve. That God gives us the opportunity to share our love. This doesn't mean that we should be frustrated and sad about that. Sometimes people think that being a Christian means you have to walk around with a frown on your face all day long. There should be a lightness and a joy in this. Thank you, God. I don't quite understand why you put this cross in my life. But if I know if I carry it well, then something good is going to happen. Not to me, but to your kingdom. And so to look at those crosses that we have, not as punishments, not as God being a sadistic tempter, but rather God who loves us so much that he would say, I want you to continue what my son began. I want you to carry your cross. Because when you do, and especially when you do it with hope and with trust, you become a sacrament of my son's passion. Remember the old definition, sacrament? Visible sign of invisible grace? A lot of people don't believe the story about the death and resurrection of Jesus. For them, it's just a fairy tale. There's a CCD class where the teacher was saying, what do we celebrate on Easter? And one of the kids said, wasn't that the day Jesus came out of his tomb, saw his shadow, and there was another 40 days of Lent? For them, it's nothing more than that. When they see us dying to ourselves and trusting, they believe in the cross of Jesus.